I want to thank Kate for the overview of some of the statistics related to this county. And Bud asked me to talk a little bit about a recent report that McKinsey issued that basically said that affordable housing in California is a huge problem, a really huge problem. And somehow, for some of us, that was news because it really made the newspaper. And I wanted to ask any of you, this is a little audience participation moment, if you can guess, or if you read it, how many homes does California need to build by 2025 to keep up with our population growth? Who said 3 million? Can you raise your hand? Where are you? Sorry. Bud, of course you know. Well, Bud, just for that, you get a Starbucks gift certificate. I'll give it to you later. So Bud and I had an actual conversation about this 3 million number last night, and he said he was he was at a meeting where people were actually parsing the number. They extrapolated wrong. They didn't guess right, and I'm thinking, okay, so if they extrapolated by less than 1 million, then that would leave us with a problem of 2 million. How many permits, or if we continue to build at the rate we're building at now, how many homes do we think we're going to build, according to McKinsey, by 2025? If we do nothing, more, 1 million. Correct. You also get a Starbucks gift certificate. See me when this is done. And so you think, all right, even if 3 million's off, we're going to be 1 million short. And so I really think that what we're doing here is incredibly important because we are, right now, California ranks 49th in the country on housing production. We're number 49 out of 50 states. I suppose if we leave the country, which I'm hearing we might do, we'll be number 1 again, right? I couldn't help it. But I think it's really a big challenge for all of us. There's one other statistic from the McKinsey report that I think is actually really worth knowing or hearing because not building housing doesn't just affect the people who don't have a place to live. It's actually a huge economic drag for our economy. Does anybody want to take a guess and win a gift card to figure out what the loss is annually in economic activity for California? How much? 149 billion, with a B. So you think about that and you think, we really should be building housing. So raise your hand in this room if you know somebody who's had a problem with affordable housing. Right, everybody. Everybody knows somebody. That somebody could even be you if you've had that challenge. At Eden Housing, we own 8,500 apartments all over the state of California. And every day I get out of bed and every day I get at least one phone call or an email from someone who is absolutely desperate for a place to live. They're all over the region. Here in Marina, we opened a property called University Villages. That development had 10 applications for every apartment we had available. This challenge is simply enormous. The McKinsey report and the Bay Area Council report that recently came out both said that the people at the lowest end of the spectrum are struggling so hard. And at Eden, I have 360 employees, and I employ some of those people who are struggling really hard. We require our staff to live in our units, but I only own 140 properties, so I only have 140 homes. And the competition to live in our own homes that we build by our own staff is overwhelming. I had a staff person send me a note the other day and tell me that he felt so blessed that he finally got selected to be a night manager at one of my properties because after he got done paying his rent, he's a maintenance guy, he had $50 a month left over. This is a huge problem. $50 a month with 3 kids is not enough money to go very far. And so this problem now here in California, but here in this region, McKinsey pointed out that the problem isn't just isolated to San Francisco, it's not isolated to LA, it's a real problem. McKinsey's report uses the Santa Cruz Watsonville MSA as one of their statistics, and they note that on average 57% of the folks who live here cannot afford to do this. I think when you hear the number 1 million, though, or 2 million, you think, oh my gosh, we can't do anything. And one of the reasons I joined MBEP after last year's session, where Wesley was talking about what she was doing, and I sat through several sessions where people were talking about solutions, is that this organization has not turned around and said, oh my gosh, the problem is so big, we're not going to do anything about it. Because I am increasingly convinced that the solutions to these problems have to start regionally and locally. And if we don't start regionally and locally, we're not going to get anywhere. And I would say that the one really big challenge that we see here, and both McKinsey and the Bay Area Council have noted this in their recent reports, getting projects built is really hard. Getting them zoned, approved, the time frames are enormous. And so what we're going to talk about today are solutions for projects that have happened, that have had varying time frames, but that they're real solutions that we could replicate here locally. So I know Eden has been a sponsor of the dashboard, and we're very happy to partner with MidPenn on that. And we really like that we're going to count. We like that we're going to count every unit, and that we're going to look at solutions, and we want to be part of those solutions. So they just turned off my mic, which is my hook. So I'm going to introduce my panelists. I have Wesley Van Camp. Oops, my papers just fell. Who's the Senior Vice President? Did I give you a promotion? Yes. Senior Vice President for Tennemer and Ansel, who's been here several times now to talk about employee housing that they've done. We have Greg Hanberg, who is with the Vice President of Art Space, who is here to talk about the work that they've done on artist housing, not just in Santa Cruz, but all over the country. And last but not least, Kevin Saunders, the CFO from CSUMB, who's here to talk about CSUMB's work to build student housing. So with that, Wesley, you're going first. And they have 3 minutes, 5 minutes each to give you an overview of a solution that they've worked on. So,
thanks, Linda. I do have a couple slides. Quite sure where the clicker is. There we go. So it's such a pleasure to be here today to discuss housing with you. And last year, I talked about our project, Spreckles Crossing. And this year, I want to talk about the connection between housing and well-being. Tennemer and Ansel is a family farming company founded in 1982. And in 2015, we took a truly visionary approach to developing farm worker housing. We set out to reformulate the traditional bunkhouse farm labor camp to address a shortage of available labor in Salinas. We designed and built a 100-unit, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom residential community that could house up to 800 agricultural employees. Spreckles Crossing opened on April 15th of this year. And in this inaugural season, we housed 366 of our employees. Now, Spreckles Housing is a shared housing concept that provides temporary housing for a seasonal workforce. But the apartment design and amenities create a space that we thought would contribute to the well-being of our employees. We built in high-speed wireless internet access to the complex and put integrated internet televisions in each apartment. We provided computers for the residents to use. There's 24-hour security, recreational activities, and lots of inviting common areas for socializing. We opened classrooms in adjacent buildings for English and literacy classes, and a high school equivalency program was offered on-site in partnership with Hartnell College. And I'm proud to say that all 8 of our employees that participated in that program have obtained their high school equivalency certificates by living at our housing. So we've just finished our first season, and we wanted to know from our resident employees how living at Spreckles Crossing impacted their lives. And there's 3 main ways in which Spreckles Crossing affected our employees' well-being: financial, comfort, and safety. And first, let me introduce our employees living at Spreckles Crossing. Okay. Here we have Maricela and Lucia cooking in the apartment they share with 4 other women. We provide all of the furnishings, all of the utensils, cookware, and everything for our employees that are coming from out of the area. We provide towels and sheets. The apartments are completely furnished. And where are our residents from? Well, I can attest that if you build it, they will come. 40% of the residents of Spreckles Crossing came from Yuma, Arizona. 27% from the Mendota-Fresno area, 18% from Oxnard, California, and about 10% of the people living at Spreckles Crossing were from the Salinas area. 8 out of 10 people living at Spreckles Crossing had lived in Salinas at some point or other in their lives. And almost all of them told us they felt safer living in the apartments than they did living in Salinas. We wanted to know how comfortable our employees were at Spreckles Crossing. So we asked the residents specifically whether they rested better here than other places that they had lived in Salinas. 86% of the residents said that they rested better, 14% said the same, but no one said that they got less rest. Residents said that they didn't feel overcrowded, that having transportation on site at Spreckles Crossing helped them get more sleep since they didn't have to wake up so early to get to work. Many of the residents also talked about being able to cook their own meals and having a choice on what they wanted to eat, which was very different when they rented rooms where they weren't given access to kitchen facilities or were required to pay for meals in addition to their rent arrangement. Of course, the biggest impact Spreckles Crossing had on our employees was the financial one. 89% of our residents paid less rent than they did elsewhere, and 79% said they also saved money on gas and transportation by living in the apartments and not having to drive to work or pay for carpools. Most importantly, though, the housing offered our employees from other growing regions the opportunity to work the Salinas season. Being able to work year-round really contributed to their economic stability. So, improved financial well-being, comfort, and safety. How did all this translate in the workplace? Well, at TNA, we pay our harvest employees a base rate of $12.50 per hour with a group production incentive that's layered on top of that. In 2016, our employees were more productive. They were earning more money through the group production incentive. They were earning, on average, $18.85 per hour this year versus $15.59 per hour in 2015. So, after being short on labor during the 2015 Salinas season, TNA built housing, and as a result, the employees living at the housing at Spreckles Crossing are some of our most productive employees ever. And most of them say they will be back next year.
You know, I remember, Wesley, when we were on a panel together a year ago, you were talking about whole fields of celery going unpicked because you could not solve the labor shortage challenge here. And I think that's a big issue for a lot of us. Next up is Greg, who's going to talk about artist housing and give you an overview of the project he did in Santa Cruz and in New Orleans.
Good morning. ArtSpace is a nonprofit organization that works nationally and helps communities all around the country create affordable housing with a focus on the arts. The lens that I want to put on my 5 minutes is what happens when affordable housing is not simply a need that needs to be met, but is in fact a central point in a community's development objectives. And I want to talk about 3 projects. The first is in Santa Cruz, California, and you may be familiar with this project. In partnership with the City of Santa Cruz and local nonprofit organizations, this project really reflects a collision of public objectives. It started with a county-wide cultural master plan. It continued with an economic brownfield site that needed redevelopment, economic revitalization needs that had to happen, and an acute awareness of affordable housing needs, particularly within the arts community in Santa Cruz. So this slide shows the property in a before condition. It's an 8.3 acre piece of land. There are 100 units of affordable housing serving households at 30%, 50%, and 60% of area median income. There is 25,000 square feet of arts-related business space for local artists and emerging businesses. There is the new home for the Cultural County of Santa Cruz County, the Cultural Commission of Santa Cruz County, and there is a new 190-seat theater developed by a local nonprofit organization, and perhaps a future development phase to come as well. 256 low-income folks, low-income artists moved into this building in 2009. It continues to be a thriving center for arts, economic development, and affordable housing in Santa Cruz County. Santa Cruz County has an arts tour. I think it's every fall, maybe every spring. When this property opened up, the open studios in Santa Cruz County, it was almost a tectonic tilt in where artists were located in the county. And this is just an incredible example of arts and affordable housing in California. In Seattle, Washington, with the implementation of Sound Transit's new light rail line, the city of Seattle, working with Sound Transit, decided that their transit-oriented development strategy would be centered on affordable housing and local-centered businesses. The initial project as part of this light rail implementation was the Mount Baker Lofts, completed in 2013. This project provides 57 units of affordable housing for households, again, at or below 60% area median income. Provides 11 small business spaces for local new business organizations, including in a location that's the most diverse zip code in the United States, primarily Asian and Pacific Islander ethnicities, a new dual language immersion preschool in partnership with the Vietnamese Friendship Association. It is absolutely a prime example of transit-oriented development, sharing a plaza with the light rail station, no parking spaces for 57 units, and again, 10 businesses. In in New Orleans, Louisiana, the Bell School campus in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans. The Bell School had the misfortune of having its roof off for repair when Hurricane Katrina hit. It has been vacant for 12 years. It was the home for the brass band kind of heritage of the Treme neighborhood. It will be redeveloped. It's currently under construction. It's a 2-block campus, 79 units of affordable housing for artists, space for nonprofit arts organizations, play fields for the neighborhood. And it really is an example of the preservation of opportunities for dislocated community residents in New Orleans and Treme, but also a relocation and a reestablishment of that cultural tradition that was Treme. In June 2017, that project will open, and we're looking forward to it very much. Thank you.
And he has 1 minute to spare. Good work. I actually had the pleasure of touring the Treme neighborhood a couple of weeks ago. It's quite an impressive building, the Bell School. It's really a beautiful historic building. And last but certainly not least, we have Kevin Saunders from CSUMB. And I know a lot of people are talking about the CSU system and their housing challenge. So Kevin, you can come up and talk about your project. Thank you.
Okay, a little bit of background first, if I could. As you can see, our goals for the university are pretty lofty as far as housing both our faculty and staff and our students. 65% we hope to house our faculty and staff. That is a number that is attainable, but it's a challenge. Our 60% students housing would be the highest in the CSU system by far. I mean, not even close. I think the closest one right now is SLO, and they have a little bit more money than the rest of the campuses in the CSU, so they can do some things we can't do. One of the benefits we received with the base reuse is our housing stock, an existing housing stock. As you can see, we have 560 2-bedrooms, 127 3-bedrooms, and out of that, we also have 66 homes, and this is all for faculty staff, 66 homes that we sell we sell the improvement to the faculty or staff member on a ground lease. The appreciation is, or depreciation, depending, is a calculation of the HUD median income index for the Salinas area. What I really wanted to talk about, though, was student housing, and I don't think people realize how unaffordable student housing really is. It costs right now about $120,000 per bed as an average in the CSU system. And so what does that mean, $120,000 per bed? Well, they're not all singles and they're not all doubles and some are triples, but that's an average, $120,000. If you threw the debt service on that, that means just to pay the debt service for that construction would be $8,000 a year. That doesn't include the operating costs, and it doesn't include the programming costs that our students expect to get when they're living in housing. So you can see if you're sending your kids to school, maybe that'll help you understand why it's so expensive. But it also doesn't include meals. So it's really a challenge. We have an opportunity. We get to blend that over our entire housing system, so it's obviously not that high, but it's still a tough nut to crack when you're building new housing. I want to talk about the Promontory student housing, and it was a public-private partnership. We had a developer approach. We've probably had, I would guess, I've been there 21 years, I've probably talked to at least 500 developers. This one was dogged. He stuck around, which is unusual because you're dealing with the university and you're dealing with the city, and that's not an easy thing to do. This developer was looking at a couple of different parcels of land in the city of Marina, and I kept focusing him back to a particular parcel that was actually our front door. Well, we have two front doors. One is from the peninsula, the other is from the valley. And so, whoops, I went too far. So essentially, we got into some negotiations. The developer purchased the land from the city of Marina. The developer and I worked together coming up with, originally it was going to be an affiliation agreement, which meant we would recognize that developer as providing housing for our students. Then we got into a limited lease negotiation, and then I ended up doing a master lease, which took the majority of the risk away from that developer. But because of the need for the university, we felt that that was in our best interest. We also had an option to purchase, which we exercised in September. Long story short, we were in the ground faster. It was cheaper, and it's a great product. As far as the cost of the bed space, I mentioned $120,000. It's $86,000, and so, yeah. So what that means really is if we can partner appropriately, I think between public privates and public publics and public privates, there's a lot we can be doing as a region, not only for student housing, and this is what I'm talking about, but for all our housing needs. And it's just an opportunity that we have to take advantage of in the situation we're at. So, thank you.
How much time do we have for Q&A? 10 minutes, okay. So I actually have some questions to ask the panelists, but I wanted to see, since we only have 10 minutes, do folks from the audience have questions that they want to ask? And since I can't see, in the front.
I would ask Greg his approach to identifying sites. Do communities or artist groups come to you, or do you go? Does ArtSpace look for projects to identify for artists?
Sure. You know, the communities we work in, we work at the invitation of community. And so when we work in Santa Cruz, when we work in New Orleans, it's because the city or some community group has approached us. The actual identification of a site to work on within that community involves the evaluation of the different goals, objectives, priorities, and what the community is really trying to do, and the physical opportunities that might exist to do that. And so there are really kind of two layers of answer to that.
So Greg, can I just ask before that I take that question, a follow-up on artist housing? Can you talk a little bit about the fair housing implications?
Sure.
You know, I think artists are great. We love to house them, but how do you do that? And how do you there's a lot of other people besides artists that need to live in the space. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. Well, most of the artists who live in our space have a day job or two in addition to their career as an artist. And so these are low-income folks living in your community who happen to also be engaged in the arts. As it relates to federal fair housing law, federal fair housing law protects protected classes of folks. Occupation is not a protected class of folks. And so just as farm worker housing, I would imagine, kind of is the same thing, we need to make sure that the process that we go through to select the artists who live in our buildings, the process is compliant with federal fair housing law. But it is perfectly acceptable and legal to provide a preference for low-income folks who happen to work in the arts.
Great, thanks. So there was a question, sir.
Yeah, for Kevin at CSUMB, what drives that high cost per bed? I'm assuming you control the land, or is there a land cost associated with that?
That's a really good question. I think it's the fact that we essentially operate under state regulations. It's not entirely a public works project, but it might as well be. And that adds an additional layer of complexity for the developer, or the builder rather, as well as cost for the institution.
So can I also ask a follow-up on the CSU question? I think there's a lot of interest in what the universities can do to meet their demands. And I'm curious, Kevin, are you subject to local zoning? And how does it work? Or can you zone your own stuff? You know, the Bay Area Council said that approvals time frame is a huge problem. Can you talk a little bit about can you shorten that? Because you're a state institute?
Well, we're still a state institution. So we are entitled by the trustees of the CSU, and they will, and it's a little bit easier, I think, than working with some jurisdictions, quite frankly. But there's still complexities. You still have CEQA, you still have all of the other things associated with development, and it's just time consuming. So even though the approval process is a little bit different and streamlined, it still takes an awful lot of time.
Great. So I actually want to ask Wesley a question about TNA, and I think this is really successful, what you've done with this particular project. Are you planning on doing another one?
Well, we do have a project that is in the planning stage, and that would be for family housing, because the project that we have right now is not addressing that. It's just for the employees and workers, mostly who are coming from out of the area to work the Salinas season. However, that's much more challenging. We had our project designed and built within a year's time on a mitigated negative declaration. So really to address the need that we had the right resources for that. We built this on the Spreckels Sugar Factory property. So all of the utilities were there. We had sewer, we had water, and the transportation was not an issue. There will be different impacts with family housing project, and I expect that would take about a decade to get through approvals.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, this light is crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Hi, Claudia Brown from the Homeless Services Center in Santa Cruz. This is all inspiring, but I haven't heard anybody talk yet about the permanent supportive housing for homelessness. It's not clear to me in the McKinsey report whether the 3.5 million homes that we have to build also includes housing for the hundreds of thousands of homeless people in California. I mean, we have 20% of the nation's homeless here. And the number of the money that we're losing, this more than $1 billion, does that include the cost of having people out on the street, which we know is really, really high? So that's another challenge that we face uniquely, not uniquely in that we don't have all the homelessness in California, but we have a huge number of homeless in California.
I can't cite McKinsey's statistics specifically, but they do actually address that. If you read past the executive summary, they actually have a whole section on just how much it costs to have people be homeless. I think the numbers range from $35,000 to $100,000 a year per homeless person for taxpayer in the form of police, emergency room, other healthcare services, and I think Joshua Bamberger is going to talk about that a little bit later, I think on the next panel. That's a huge number. And I would actually just point to a couple of neighboring counties who recently had ballot initiatives. When I worked at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group and we started the Housing Trust Fund 2 decades ago, we tried to get a housing ballot initiative for housing passed, and we polled it. It polled at 30%. 2 weeks ago, it passed in Santa Clara County with a 67% approval rating, and they passed $950 million, with $750 million of it targeted at homelessness. I don't think that the counties are not aware of the challenge, and I think the real challenge for that particular issue is where do we find the resources? And if the state is not going to do something, then I think the challenge is really going to be at the local and the county level to come up with solutions. And so I don't know, I think we'd be open to ideas on, what do you have to do regionally to find the resources? This is not an inexpensive problem. It costs us more money. There's a lot of health and housing intersection kinds of pilots going on in California right now that I think we can learn from. But I think McKinsey's very clear that that's a big part of the problem for California, and we have the highest homelessness problem of any state in the country. And I think part of that's because of the climate, correct? And so I think it's not a challenge that's inconsequential for us. So it was in the report. I don't know, does anybody else want to talk about homelessness? I think part of the solution is supply, right? And so, this panel is looking at interesting supply solutions. Are there other questions?
Right here.
Right here and then right there.
Good morning. My question is for Wesley.
Oh, perfect.
Great
Thank you.
lights on. Wesley, with our area being so ag-rich, have other ag companies reached out to you to find out how you successfully put this housing project together? And then the other part of my question is, I know that you faced some challenges in the community. There were people that were very opposed to the project. How did you overcome those challenges?
Okay, I'll take the second part of your question first, because I can dispose of it quickly. It's yes, we did face challenges. We were sued under a CEQA lawsuit. We had the fortunate ability to be self-financed for our project, so we went ahead and built it despite the fact that there was a lawsuit pending. So if we had been financed by a bank, the project would have stopped and stalled until that happened. It ended up settling the CEQA lawsuit once the project was built. So that was dispensed with. It's a very unique situation. And so the first part of your question is, have we been approached by other ag businesses and growers and people who would want to supply housing for their employees? And yes, we have. What I can tell you is that there's not going to be a simple formula. I mean, we really had all the pieces in place for this project to be successful with the speed that we built it. The first of that is financial, and the second of that is, where are you going to build? And we actually had, one of the pieces of land that you could build in Monterey County, a project like this. So other growers are going to be challenged with zoning. They're going to be challenged with having that infrastructure. They're going to have to figure out sewage treatment. They're going to have to figure out whether or not they're going to have to lay sewage line from their agricultural parcel, which is what they own, to a treatment facility. Water might be an issue in terms of having a drinking water supply. They're not going to be able to supply from an ag well. So those are all other challenges. And what I can say is our project was approved September 1st of 2015, and we opened on April 15th of 2016. In that time, there is no other large-scale agricultural project that has been approved as of yet. There are some people who are in the planning stage and trying to get that done, but they are facing hurdles. So how quickly will that happen? It may be some years. And then we're also limited by the types of employers or the specific employers who would be able to do a project like ours.
Well, and I think Wesley raises an interesting point, because I think there are groups like Eden or MidPenn and others who might actually, if you're an employer who doesn't have a Wesley, who isn't going to be in charge of doing a big real estate development for housing. A lot of employers don't want to do housing. I think you have to ask yourself, is there a solution like the one CSUMB is doing where you're partnering with a private developer or a nonprofit developer and saying, oh, we might have the land, but we just are not a housing developer or manager. And I think that these kinds of forums really are intended, and what we're doing with MBEP is intended to encourage partnerships where people really think about that. I know we've been talking at Eden to a number of school districts about how might we partner to build affordable housing on land that schools own. Because I don't think unless you start having those conversations, because I'm not a grower, so I'm not going to get into the ag business, and so why would a grower, if they're not an owner manager of housing, get into the building of housing business? And I think these forums are really important for people to think about. I might not be able to build it myself, but I might have a piece of the puzzle that can help do it. And I just want to make one other comment about infrastructure. The one thing that the new federal administration is very serious about is infrastructure. Everywhere we go, we're seeing water issues and sewer issues, and not just in this county, but general infrastructure issues as a huge barrier. And the elimination of redevelopment by California has not helped us in any way with that solution. And if we don't think about how we use this as an opportunity to help improve the critical infrastructure that goes with housing, and housing is part of infrastructure, I think we're missing a real opportunity in this next 4 years to really try to help us lay some groundwork for this. And particularly, at Eden, at Camphora, the farm worker project that we just opened, we put a sewer line under a freeway. That's a huge challenge for building housing. And so we have to really think about where's our accountability at the state and federal level to help us pay for some of that stuff, because you can't put it all on the housing project. It makes it physically impossible to do it. There was another question right there.
Yes, for Wesley. My question is about the off-season. What do you do with the housing in the off-season with these 100 units?
It is largely unoccupied, so I believe that we have 4 or 5 employees that are living year-round in the housing, but it's really designed as seasonal housing, and then we are restricted to that by our mitigated negative declaration with the county.
So no Airbnb.
No Airbnb, no.
Sorry, just thinking about something that's been really popular. Are there other questions from the audience? Cindy.
I would like to hear from each of the panelists, what is the one thing that would make your job easier in providing housing?
Well, at this moment, a little bit of predictability, perhaps. I think that, in my experience, from a developer perspective, we're very adaptable, to things that change. And what's very difficult is when you're in the midst of change, and the partners that need to make things happen are struggling with that change. And the work that I do is challenged in 2 ways: opportunities to do the work, and then funding, to actually implement those opportunities. And we wrestle with those challenges every day.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I guess one of my questions was, could you do the project you did in Santa Cruz today?
Absolutely. We probably would do it differently. And, affordable housing is happening today in California. Arts facility development is happening today in California. The Tannery project was broken very specifically into 3, or if you count, 4 different components, and each of those components had a financing structure that made sense at the time. Some of those financing structures shifted kind of between the implementation of the projects. And so, you preserve the opportunity to be adaptable and to morph your project to existing resources, existing opportunities. So yes.
And you had a lot of financing from the state of California for at least one of those phases.
We had a ton of redevelopment financing to the project. We had a property provided, at 0 cost from the redevelopment agency of Santa Cruz. We had redevelopment dollars, kind of housing dollars in. We had significant state MHP dollars kind of in the project. Then we had low-income housing tax credits in the project. It is not unusual at all in my work around the country to have available financing resources taken away and then to be replaced by resources to be identified. And so it's clear to me that in California, affordable housing is happening. Could the Tannery project, the affordable housing component of the Tannery project, happen today? I think it could. It might not happen in exactly the same way. We may create the units in a different kind of configuration. We might provide different types of amenities and spaces for the clientele. But yeah, I think it could happen.
Yeah, I think the challenge that I see is how do you replace the state funding and the redevelopment funding at the same scale that it existed at 6 years ago? I mean, if you have any thoughts on that you've seen from other places in the country, I think it would be interesting.
You know, California, a couple things about California. It takes a while, you know, and so, you know, part of when I talk about opportunity, it's not just having a site, but it's having a patient site so that you can put the deal together, and that takes a long time. It's expensive. I'm working in Honolulu, Hawaii right now. Honolulu's more expensive than California. It's also more difficult to work in than California from an environmental review perspective. And it doesn't quite have the resources that California has. And so, I think that there were costs incurred in the creation of the housing component of the Tannery project that we would try to reduce and try to shift probably some of the workspace that's in the live work units that's part of the residential project into a different side of the project and provide the working space needs maybe on a different portion of the campus.
Great, thanks. So Wesley, your wish list.
That would be change in zoning, as I think is what would really make it all easier. So we're in, general plan communities and counties, and that makes it very difficult to build housing, and we need housing on a scale, on a magnitude scale. So, for example, we built 100 units. It's kind of a drop in the bucket. And where are we going to site those? And I don't think that we've addressed that at our community levels. And then once that zoning is changed, if that's my wish list, to have a zoning by right, so that you're not then challenged with the CEQA lawsuits by the neighborhood groups that don't want the housing next to them.
Have you met Governor Brown? Greg, I'm sorry, Kevin, your wish list.
I guess the CEQA is an issue, but it's also prevailing wage. And I know people don't think that is that important. I heard that last year at the seminar here. But quite frankly, it is. And there's no differentiation between an affordable housing project that we're trying to produce on the campus versus a market rate. And prevailing wage is a real issue. And I know people don't think it is, but we're not using tax money. And the money we're using, we're a self-support program, and we're trying to provide affordable housing for our faculty, staff, and our students. And it's about 30, 40, 50% more, regardless of what people tell you. I can tell you it is. So that's one of the issues.
Great, and so I know that my time is up, our time is up. I want to just say thank you to MBEP for convening this and for taking on housing, because I think it's really critical for the region. And I want to thank our panelists, and if you would join me in thanking them.